Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Making SLOs Matter. This webinar is aimed at supporting the meaningful and rigorous goal setting within our SLO process. This is the second session in New York's pilot use of the quality framework. This is Courtney Jablonski speaking, and with us here today is also Jess Wood, our partner from Education Council that you were able to meet back in December. So good morning, Jess.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to be with you again.
Please note that today's webinar is being recorded with the potential of being posted on Engage New York. I'm going to turn it over to Jess to just take a brief minute to review some basic webinar protocols and some of the GoToMeeting features that you have access to before we get into the discussion today.
Good morning, everyone. So we have a large number of participants on the line today, and we want to ensure that the experience is as optimal as possible. So as a default, each of you are muted. If you notice on the right-hand side, you should have a GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar control panel that looks something like this. If you notice ever that the microphone is highlighted green, that means that the group that can hear you. Sometimes, this very occasionally, the default doesn't work on your landline. So if you could also ensure that your telephone, if you're calling in, is also muted, that can assure that we have as little background noise as possible. We'd also recommend that you close any open windows that you can actively participate. There's going to be discussions and polls throughout. You can expand or minimize the GoToMeeting control panel by clicking on this red minimize arrow, and that will allow you to extend the size of the screen so that you can see a little bit, the deck a little bit more largely. As we mentioned, there's going to be opportunities to share your thoughts and reflections throughout this session. And so one way that you might do that is to utilize the hand icon. It's on your control panel. It looks like this. If you click that icon, you'll signal to us that you have a question or something that you want to share. The second way that you can signal that you'd like to be unmuted and discuss is to utilize the questions box, which is towards the bottom of your control panel. Here you'll be able to type in a question and ask and answer those questions. And then we'll be actively monitoring that question panel throughout, so feel free to respond there. I'm going to turn it back over to Courtney if we don't have any questions about the logistics of GoToWebinar.
Great, thanks, Jess. I wanted to take a minute to just clear up some confusion. As STLED lead recipients, you are participating, like we said, in this pilot use of the quality framework. And around this work, we talked about 3 specific goals in December. And the first was really to be able to provide you with tailored support around improving your APPR implementation. So with this, we're taking the time over the course of the year to provide you with tools and resources, knowing that improvement takes time, and that these system and structures that you're putting in place are going to help you to be able to sustain this continuous improvement post the STLED grant period. We're hoping that the group here, and as we are interacting in both the webinar sessions and the in-person sessions, can become this cohort of peer support for helping you to problem solve and brainstorm. So please feel free, like we said today, to participate by asking questions to the group and also engaging in the polls that are extended, as well as then reaching out to one another or sharing your own thoughts on practice as we go through. To be clear, also, the quality framework sessions are geared towards just the lead applicants because of limited space, but it is our expectation that you're sharing the promising practices, the tools, and the resources with anybody that you're partnered with throughout the grant. So if you need extra copies or you're not sure which links to materials can be shared or where they can be found for others, please just let us know, because we definitely want this to be disseminated out there with people you're engaging with. Just as a reminder around the year-long support, during December we talked about that first use of the quality framework where you were able to identify some of the priorities surrounding your implementation of APPR. Today we're talking specifically about the collection of trustworthy evidence and focusing in on the high-quality SLOs. In February, we'll have our second in-person opportunity to continue this conversation around trustworthy evidence, and we'll look more specifically at the observation process, feedback provided to educators, and the professional development that's offered to them that can be used to help drive improvements in your instructional programs. In March, we'll analyze where you are in terms of the action plans around your enhanced APPR implementation, as well as have an opportunity to talk about your dissemination activities that are being done throughout the grant period. And then finally, we'll close out our year taking place in late March really thinking about plans for sustainability, and we'll focus on examining metrics surrounding the preparation, recruitment, retention, and development of your teachers. So our team did a really thorough review of the SLO samples that you submitted in preparation for today's webinar, and not surprisingly, we found similar trends and patterns to what we've come across in a lot of our site visits and the review of other field sample SLOs. So today's webinar is meant to help us briefly dispel some of those misperceptions and confront the common challenges that we come across in the development of high-quality SLOs, while spending the majority of our time focused on 6 actionable steps that can really help support that meaningful, rigorous goal-setting process. Your SLO samples had notes of really high-quality implementation, and I've highlighted those here for your review. In today's session, we're going to explore some steps that you're able to take to build on these promising practices to make sure that this type of content becomes a regular part of your SLO submission rather than isolated examples of excellence. So you can see here lots of the samples included the multiple sources of baseline data rather than a single source. There were 15% that had used performance-based assessments or had indicated that the assessments used had a component of performance-based measurement for students. 28% of them made reference to concrete instructional strategies and programming, and that's a place we'll dig into further today to talk about how to make SLOs really come to life for educators. And then 17% of the SLO samples had indicated directly this idea of progress monitoring efforts, again, helping the SLOs become more than just a compliance mechanism and really helping to drive that support for student learning. There were also areas that proved to be common challenges in the SLO samples that were submitted. As we examined each component closely, 91% of the SLOs submitted wouldn't have met the idea of high quality expectations in one or more of the areas. And so I've noted here some of the common trends that we came across. 20% of the SLOs were missing one of the required elements. Just want to remind you there is the New York State SLO template, which outlines the required parts of any SLO that's written within the APPR system, and that can be found on Engage New York. 65% of the SLOs had learning content that was vague or nonspecific. And when we think about what this means, typically we would see the learning standards just named instead of described and prioritized based on student needs. Other examples were a full copy and paste of the content-related standards, again, rather than pushing for educators to really think about what is it that their students currently know and are able to do, and what's the next prioritized step for that course. 48% of the targets reviewed seemed to lack rigor or didn't require academic growth of all students in the course. This is something that the department's been very public about in its expectation. All students are expected to demonstrate at least 1 year of academic growth, and so we'll spend a lot of time today talking about various ways that you at the district level as well as the building level can help ensure this happens. And the final area for growth that was noted was this idea of the rationale statements, where 72% seemed to really lack the connection to instructional practice and planning. And again, we'll circle back to this today because this is how we're really able to unlock the power of SLOs to help you close the achievement gaps that you see within your student bodies. So as much work as there is to do, the bright spot here is that you guys are the right people for this conversation. Your submission of the SLOs and your participation in today's webinar are signs of your dedication and commitment. We're going to talk a lot about the importance of calibrating those who are approving your SLOs so that, again, that promising practice called out on the previous slide, along with the improvements to the areas noted here, are able to be consistently replicated across your district.
So the areas that Courtney described that we'll be focusing on today align really well with the quality framework general areas of focus that we introduced in December. Firstly, there's the foundations for action, which is about building a shared vision and infrastructure for your APPR system at large, but then also for SLOs to ensure high quality implementation. And then secondly, there's the importance of trustworthy evidence. It's particularly important given the weight of SLOs and untested grades and subjects. There's a critical need to ensure the validity and reliability of this data if it will inform decision-making at multiple levels for individual teachers, for schools, and for district and state policy. And then lastly, we know that these SLOs must contribute meaningfully to strengthening instruction, otherwise they're just another compliance-driven activity. And so we'll focus on how to take action in each of these areas with a particular focus on SLOs. And that challenge of this becoming something that's just compliance-driven is something that's particularly unfortunate because long-term goal setting is something that's just a critical aspect of great teaching and learning. We know that even before the redesign of evaluation systems, highly successful teachers and leaders were using long-term goals to thoughtfully map what they wanted students to know and be able to do and to develop pathways to get students there. And these goals can also be really critical in communicating to students a clear vision of what they'll learn so that they can track their own progress towards those goals. Today we're going to be introducing concrete steps that will bring SLOs to life for students, teachers, leaders, and parents.
So I'm sure that you also have come across this, but oftentimes when we're talking with people around SLOs, we hear misconceptions or common challenges around the idea of developing high-quality, rigorous SLOs. Even some of the SLOs that you submitted today for today's session seem to reflect some of these misunderstandings and challenges. So our goal today is to help you better understand what's expected and then walk away with actionable strategies for that continuous improvement. One of the first misperceptions that we come across is the idea that pre-assessments have to be used within SLOs. SLOs are the state-determined district goal-setting process, and the commissioners delegated that decision-making authority to district leaders. So in some cases, superintendents have delegated that decision-making process to principals or assistant superintendents. In any case, there needs to be a decision-maker in that SLO process. There's been some uncertainty as to how to handle situations when a teacher either proposes an SLO that a principal or district leader is not in agreement with, or the idea of various multiple baseline assessments. The SLOs belong to the district. There are non-negotiable items, and if necessary, a default SLO could be used, just as is done in the case when we have those educators in grades 4 through 8 who have been expected to receive a state-provided growth score and don't. So I encourage you throughout, when we looked at the samples, there seemed to be sort of a lack of consistency across the approval process. And I encourage you to think about who is it that are assigned that responsibility of approving SLOs, and then how do you really help clearly communicate the vision and high expectations around your process. As we think about this, again, the pre-assessments needing to be used within SLOs is a misperception. We know that multiple sources of evidence are best to inform high rigorous targets, and that could include historical trend data and also past student performance. One of the most troublesome misconceptions that we have come across is the idea that targets do not have to be set for all students, or that low targets should be set for students who struggle. I'm going to click now to a few examples that we came across within your own SLO samples, but I do understand we don't have full context around these, so they're meant to represent some of these common challenges that we've come across also in the field at large. So you'll see here, the first example is one SLO had required only 49% of students to pass the assessment in order for a teacher to be placed in the effective range. We'll circle back to this later in terms of how that communicates the district's expectation for student learning and how we are able to really help address the idea of high expectations for all. A second SLO had indicated that 22% of the class had targets set below the passing rates. This again is another sign of the lack of rigor within a target being set. And the third sample here in the third row is a target on the summative assessment that's been set lower than a student's performance on the pre-assessment. This is not allowable. We have the idea of a minimum threshold target, but the expectation is that all students are showing, again, that 1 year of academic growth. So if you have targets that have been set below a student's pre-assessment performance, this is something that needs to be addressed immediately. Again, these samples are not in full context. It may be that these are appropriate targets within the actual setting, but it's a discussion and definitely flags for people who are in the approval process. So to be clear, all students should have targets set for them that reflect at least that 1 year of academic growth. The final misperception, an overwhelming number of people only see SLOs as part of the evaluation process rather than as a tool that could be used for more purposeful instruction, closer monitoring of student learning, and greater student growth. This is most often reflected in the portions of the SLO dedicated to content or rationales, as I talked about in our own samples here. We'll discuss later how to make sure that the content is prioritized and also the connections to instructional planning and practice are in place within the rationale. Without that purposeful planning, SLOs become really something that either sits literally or figuratively on the shelf and are rarely revisited until the end of the evaluation cycle. So we know that there are very real challenges in implementing high-quality SLOs. It's rarely a lack of belief in what needs to be there. So several of the common challenges are listed here. We also know that there are probably others that you've been coming up against. And so I want to take 1 minute now for you to read through these potential barriers. And then we're going to have a poll appear on your screen to indicate which of these seems to be the largest barrier in your own development. If you're representing a consortium right now, you can respond to the poll and thinking about this as an aggregate perspective on behalf of your consortium members. So you should now see on your screen the poll that's been launched, and you can go ahead and select through those options. Are your largest barriers to the development of high-quality SLOs the collective investment in the process, the systemic method for collection or tracking SLOs, inconsistencies in the approval process, or the SLOs are not connected to instructional planning practice? If you're facing other barriers that aren't listed here, you could choose option E as other. Okay, we've got about 80% of folks who have voted, so we'll give you just another minute or two to make a selection. So it seems as though 39% of you are saying that your largest barrier right now is this idea of a collective investment in the process. We're going to talk today about how to build that shared vision for learning around the SLO process. The second largest barrier noted was the idea of the SLOs not being connected to the instructional program. And again, that'll be addressed in one of our 6 steps that we cover in detail today. If you are one of the people who had selected other as a barrier, I encourage you to also share with us within that question box that Jess had mentioned earlier what those barriers are that you are facing in terms of high-quality SLO development. I'm going to switch back now to our main screen so that you should be able to now see the slide deck. Listed here are those 6 concrete steps that we've referenced, and these are going to help increase the quality of SLOs in your district and the impact that they can have on teaching and learning. Just take a moment to read through each one and note to yourself where you believe you have strong practice in place, and then which of these may help be one of the areas you need further development in order to help address the barriers that you had just identified for yourselves. So for the remainder of the webinar, we're going to walk through each one of these steps, illustrating how they can be used to help overcome those common challenges that you face, and we'll spotlight the relative tools and resources that are available to you as you take the steps towards improvement. collective investment in the SLO development process is a struggle for many people, just as you had indicated in your poll here. By engaging stakeholders in all phases of SLO development, you're communicating that value and importance of SLOs while also likely increasing their investment in the high-quality implementation. One of the very first things we encourage folks to do is to take a needs assessment of student performance. Which of your students are struggling to meet those grade level or course expectations? Thinking about, are there particular subject areas, grade levels, subgroups of students that stand out as struggling more than others? It's also important to focus on those students who are meeting the grade level expectations at the beginning of the course, because remember, every student within the SLO needs to have a target that represents that 1 year of academic growth. Using this knowledge of where your student performance is at the start of a course, along with your district's vision and strategy for closing those identified achievement gaps, can really help you establish expectations for SLOs and also clearly communicate these expectations to your administrators, your teachers, parents, and students. So we're going to take a quick minute to look at how one district has started to do this. For those of you that were with us in December, our representative from Coxsackie-Athens had shared how they are posting those expectations and their vision for student performance within their website. So Coxsackie-Athens has worked to clearly communicate their expectations for student learning to all stakeholders. When you go onto their main page of the district website, you're able to see a section that spotlights and draws your attention to the importance of their evaluation system within the district. That's noted here on the screen. When you access the materials found on the district's APPR subpage, just like many of your own posting of your APPR plans, parents in the community are able to see and learn about the aspects of the teacher and principal evaluation system. Including in this is that target setting process found within the district's SLOs for Coxsackie-Athens. In addition, and similar I'm sure to many of your websites, there's the district strategic plan that's posted in conjunction with the Board of Education goals. And you can see here it clearly defines expectations for K-12 student academic growth. A really powerful next step for others like you and Coxsackie-Athens may be to post the actual SLO targets that have been established at each grade level or subject area so that you're able to share with those family members the targets that are being set for each child. This may help you to purposely show how the academic goals and aspirations set forth in your district strategic plan are going to be met, and it can also help build that strong home-school partnership, helping families to feel invested in the process and their academic goals that are set for their children. By publicly posting those targets, you may also help others communicate the instructional program or the use of resources within the district. I've seen in many of the districts that we visited this idea of building the homeschool community through posting of tips and tools, videos, and classroom instruction taking place. And again, posting this in conjunction with the SLO goals is a way to really help community members feel aligned and to build an action plan for ensuring student success by all. If we think back to some of those low rigor targets that we had shown as an example here, publicly posting your SLO targets may help stakeholders consider the message that's being sent with the various targets that have been set. It's unlikely that a teacher or a parent would probably feel comfortable in saying that only 50% of students are meeting their academic targets represents effectiveness. What that would most likely come across as a struggle is that it's leaving 50% of our students as perhaps unprepared for the next school year. Not only does that mean that the students need that extra support, but it also means that teachers consequently each year will be trying to catch students up. So as we think about this, I encourage you to use this question box now in the comment box now to share how you might better align the SLO process to your district's vision and or your thoughts about this idea of potentially posting the SLO targets. So I'm going to give you about 1 to 2 minutes. As Jess had said, within the question feature, you're able to type and reply send to all so that the group can see the thoughts on this. As people are thinking about the reflections and using that question box, I'm also going to look at the attendee list. If there's anybody who wants to talk about this or share a thought or a question now, you can use that raise your hand feature, and we can pause here to unmute you individually. When we say your name, just make sure that you're also unmuting your phone line if you've muted that so that the group can hear you. Okay, thanks for those of you who are responding here. I'm just scrolling through. I agree. There was a comment here about not wanting to post individual goals, and that's absolutely true. We need to remember the privacy rules here. This is the idea of posting those overarching targets that may be set across a grade level within a content area. Again, being cognizant of the privacy for sure. Another great comment, thinking about how can we strategically post and informatively post the various SLO targets with the number of variations that may happen across a school district. I know in talking in December with folks from Cox Tech Athens, one of the ideas was to use their curriculum page to also help where resources are posted by grade level or content area, maybe a place to be align those targets with specified areas. Another option may also be the idea of posting or talking about these SLO targets, if it's not publicly posted, on your curriculum nights in the fall, as well as at parent, student, teacher conferences. Lots of ways to engage that family and community partnership. So this is something I encourage you to keep thinking about. The bottom line here is that it's important that when we're thinking about aligning with your district vision, your goal, your academic expectations, that you're able to talk with parents on an individual basis to say, here is the academic expectation for your student, here's the instructional support and resources we have available, both to you and the teacher, to help make sure that your student's successful. I'm going to click now to step 2. As we noted earlier, there are lots of variation in the SLO samples provided to us, even within a single district submission. So the best way to calibrate on SLO quality and to increase the meaningfulness of what's been developed is to provide training and support to those who are involved. Teachers and principals should have a clear understanding of what the district's expectations and guidelines are for the development and approval of SLOs, and the training should include the use of concrete models and examples that illustrate high-quality products. We've been sharing a variety of tools to help stakeholders calibrate on SLO quality. Many of you have visited the Teacher and Leader Effectiveness tab off of Engage New York and accessed the Student Learning Objective landing page that you'll see screenshots of here. On this page, you'll find field samples, webinars, and ready-made tools. Each year, the department's expanded the set of available SLOs to teachers and principals. And we know that high-quality implementation is dependent on seeing modeling and receiving feedback. So the SLO samples from the past 2 years have been annotated using the multi-state SLO rubric that you see here. Both the field samples and the annotated rubric are hyperlinked. They span multiple grade levels and content areas, and they note alignments to best practice. You'll see the samples will have multiple sources of baseline data, either in replacement of or in conjunction with pre-assessments. Many of the samples also are annotated to illustrate that interdependent nature of learning content, assessment, and instructional practice that we referenced in the rationale statement from our look at your samples. Using the multi-state rubric as a source of approval criteria can also help you to ensure that your SLO targets are approved that require at least that 1 year of academic growth for all students. When you're thinking about the training for your teachers and principals on this, many of the instructional webinars are also posted on the Student Learning Objective landing page. You can use these to provide that training and support throughout your process. Many districts have used this to eliminate unnecessary testing while using baseline data to set those more rigorous targets. Teacher leaders, for example, in South Clinton Falls are learning how to analyze that past performance trend and use historical data to increase the rigor of their target set for the high school Regents courses. The teacher leaders are setting action plans in place to support their work across the district. And you too, within STLED, could be using your principal leaders and or teacher leaders to help lead trainings around similar type of work. The SLO 103 webinar uses 2 course examples to show how past performance and historical data can be used to determine appropriate targets and to inform instructional decisions and approaches. Once a common understanding of guidelines and expectations is in place, a next step for districts may be to ensure this idea of a continued calibration for those in charge of the approval process. And that leads us to steps 3 and 4, and I'll turn it over to Jess now.
So although responsibility of SLO development is ultimately, or is shared by many folks, ultimately the responsibility rests with the approver. And as Courtney's mentioned previously, the district, whether it's the superintendent or their designee, ultimately bears responsibility of ensuring that SLO targets are ambitious, rigorous, aligned with the district's expectations, that they're accurate, complete, and meaningful. And so districts can address low-quality SLOs and inconsistencies with a couple of steps. First, they can establish a clear approval process. Secondly, they can model and host calibration sessions for approvers. And third, they can conduct audits of approved SLOs. And I want to share a couple of tools, as I feel we do often in these sessions, to help districts inform their thinking as they take on those processes. So on this next slide, you'll see 2 tools that might be helpful as you consider how you might begin the calibration and audit process within your district or continue to strengthen it. The first is the Leading the Student Learning Objective Process in Your School webinar that's available through Engage NY. This is a tool that's specifically for district and school leaders that can help them establish clear SLO approval processes. And then the second set of tools are ones that we introduced in December. They're available on our Google site. And those are specifically a set of tools from Rhode Island that are district-facing as well. And they help illustrate how districts in Rhode Island are implementing calibration and audits with step-by-step guides, examples, and many different tools, and a whole presentation that explains how these processes are introduced in Rhode Island. These are great for, one, helping districts implement a SLO process with fidelity, but then it's also a really important opportunity to provide feedback to both approvers and to teachers so that, again, these SLOs continue to live and be part of the instructional process. So I want to quickly get your feedback on where you are in the process of training your approvers on how to implement this process with fidelity and in a way that improves instruction. And so I want to introduce another poll now. This one asks, which elements are part of your process for training SLO approvers? And on this poll, you can actually select more than one option. The first option is an initial training with quality standards and practice. So that might be your district utilizing the multi-state SLO rubric and providing sample SLOs, annotated sample SLOs that illustrate those expectations or where they missed the mark and how. The second option you see on the poll, ongoing calibration to ensure inter-year reliability, might be when your district actually has sessions with SLO approvers or teachers where everyone has to come to consensus on whether SLOs are meeting the mark for high quality expectations or whether there are ways in which they can be improved and how. And then the last poll option, and again you can select all of these or none, whichever makes sense for your context, is that approvers receive feedback on approved submitted SLOs. And that's what we call the audit process, where someone in the district office or designees of the district actually collect SLOs and then assess them themselves and provide feedback to the approvers on how those SLOs met the expectations for high quality. So take a few seconds and see about half of us have voted. Please complete your response in the next 15 seconds if you haven't voted already. So the initial poll results suggest that nearly all of the participants on the call have an initial training that explains the expectations for quality SLOs. However, it seems like there might be that this topic of calibration and auditing is one that's very much applicable to most of the participants on the call. So we're excited to dig into that now. Calibration and auditing are great ways to norm on SLO quality across your district and to efficiently review many different SLOs. So we're going to start by focusing on calibration. Just as you would want to calibrate your observers to ensure inter-rater reliability, the same process needs to occur with SLOs. This is a way of increasing consistency of the SLO approval process so that you can feel confident that these goals are rigorous, that they're meaningful to instruction. And this process can occur with your district staff, with building leaders, anyone that's approving their goals. And what we recommend is that as you begin to develop that shared understanding of what a great SLO is with your approvers, we'd encourage you to recommend that building leaders take that process and replicate it with their teachers at the beginning of each year so that teachers feel well prepared to establish really meaningful SLOs. During the sessions, these calibration sessions, participants use clear scoring criteria like the multi-state SLO rubric to review SLOs, discuss evidence, and then agree on scores. If you've ever scored the New York State math or writing open responses, you may remember from that process that as you're beginning calibration, you always get the right answers at the outset before you're allowed to score on your own and come to consensus with your partners at your scoring table. There's a similar process that needs to happen as you're doing calibration as well. As you're beginning to train building leaders or your district staff, we strongly recommend that you have SLOs that folks are calibrating on for which there are clear scores and that the district has stated this one meets the mark and this one doesn't. Sometimes when you only have consensus in your calibration sessions, people can leave those sessions without a clear understanding of what SLOs meet the mark and which don't, and it actually doesn't end up changing people's behavior as they go to the SLO approval process. And just to reinforce, Rhode Island strongly recommends calibrating administrators first. When they have the multi-state rubric in front of them and they have those strong anchors of what high-quality SLO looks like, they're more likely to be able to provide a great foundation to their teachers during the school year as teachers are developing their own goals. I want to next turn to audits. Audits are a great way to kind of get a state of the union about SLOs in your district. And then they're also an opportunity to potentially provide feedback to teachers and approvers of the SLOs that you audit. So auditors should have a strong and shared sense of the SLO process and quality so that they produce accurate and reliable data. And as they're collecting those SLOs, they're going to be reporting back information that can inform your policy decisions, but also the kinds of supports that you might need to provide to the district to continue to improve the overall quality of the SLO process. These audits can be conducted at multiple levels and by different departments. So for example, you could have an internal team that reviews all SLOs. And this is something that we do at DCPS. It's something that Hawaii, which is actually an entire district, in case you didn't know, does as well, in which an internal team at the district reviews all SLOs and then reports back information to both approvers, teachers, and then the district to improve the overall quality of the process. Alternatively, it could also be really interesting to focus on a specific department or content area or grade span that would allow you to further inform your policy decision making, whether that's around curriculum, PD, or assessment decisions. One thing that I'd recommend as you engage in this process is that you might consider tailoring your look-fors in the audit process based on the areas of past inconsistency or challenge. So SLO and calibration are an incredibly helpful tool as you consider how you might continue to strengthen your process for SLOs. It's a way to not only collect information on what's happening in your district, but also to ensure that teachers are receiving meaningful feedback, setting meaningful goals, and that approvers feel confident as they engage in the process.
So our final two steps are about making SLOs live as part of your instructional program. As noted earlier, high-quality SLOs can play an important part in your teaching and learning. When teachers start from what it is they want their students to know and be able to do, they can more effectively design their instruction aligned with those goals. Strong SLOs also enable students to have a better understanding of what it is they are supposed to be learning, and this allows them to assess their own progress towards those goals as well. In order to realize this power and potential, districts have to have a systemic method for collecting and tracking SLOs, both at a building and a district level. They should describe how student academic growth will be monitored, and evaluators should discuss this progress at pre- and post-conferences with teachers. Finally, it's the district's responsibility to communicate those expectations for SLO closeout procedures that can help inform the next phase of SLO prep and development. So let's take a look at some tools that can help us, one, put in a systemic method for collection of SLOs, and then connect to our instructional programming conversations. I'm going to put up another poll question for you now. As you think about this, we want to know which elements below will be part of your system for collecting and tracking SLOs. So are your SLOs submitted solely to the principal within a building? Do you have SLOs that are submitted both to the principal and or the district? And then finally, does the district use SLOs to align to the curriculum and inform policy? Again, similar to the last poll, you're able to select more than one of the choices provided here. Okay, we'll give you another about 10 seconds to select your choices. So it's great to see here, again, nearly all of you have SLOs that are submitted to your building principals, and that really reiterates just as important that you just talked about in terms of your calibration for the approval process. There's a large number of you, again, more than the majority, that also have SLOs available at the district level to help provide feedback on that submission and approval process. And then the final piece is definitely an area that it looks as though all of us can continue to take steps forward in terms of using those SLOs to help align your curriculum, assessments, and instructional practice across the district. So let's look at some of the benefits of that. In order to be able to use the SLO data to inform instructional improvements, you have to be able to collect it. Let me switch back to the screen for you. In smaller districts, you may be collecting this through a password-protected system, even something as simple as a Google Doc. In larger school systems, you may be purchasing and/or developing separate management systems. In the review of your SLOs submitted, we saw that Alden, Newburgh, North Syracuse, and I'm sure many others of you are using commercialized products to store and/or track your SLOs. There's lots of ways that the SLO data can help inform improvements for both teacher practice and district decision making. So let's start with how this data might be used to inform instruction. Analyzing SLOs by content area can help indicate the curriculum provisions that might best support your instructional practice. For example, if many teachers have identified the idea of close reading of informational text as a skill that students have to acquire, then training or materials could be properly aligned across your district or within a building. That might include things like sample lesson plans, videos of aligned practice, webinars on the infusion of literacy across your content areas, or the purchase of aligned student materials. Related to this, analyzing SLOs by your grade level or content area may help the district, school leaders, department, or grade level teams align the professional development that would help support educators ensure students are meeting their targets. For example, evaluators could discuss the progress being made toward the established learning targets within a teacher's pre- and post-observation conference. It's a great time to be able to connect the observed teacher and student behavior to those established targets and to talk about further supports that may be necessary. Many of you through your STLE programs have content coaches, and you could assign these coaches to related sets of teachers to provide support through co-planning, co-teaching, or modeling of instructional practice. If teachers share a common curriculum or assessment, the district or school leaders may also consider how they can best support the idea of data analysis and collection. Again, teacher leaders, principal leaders could lead things such as data tracking templates, collaborative planning sessions to analyze that data, and/or the support and development of higher quality assessments. We've seen lots of districts this year gather educators to really do that assessment analysis and look to move towards more performance-based assessments. SLO information can also yield vital evidence for continuous district-level improvements. For example, that end-of-the-year SLO data and its correlations with other measures of performance may indicate whether or not what students are supposed to be learning is properly aligned with the way that learning is measured and how it's being taught. You may also be able to indicate where students are slipping behind due to those expectations not being rigorous enough across a system, a grade level, or a department. Finally, analyzing sample SLOs may also uncover patterns of misunderstanding. For instance, you may come across areas where there's a lack of specificity in the learning content provided in your secondary SLOs or in your elementary SLOs. You could think about the idea, are SLOs being approved without the appropriate connections to progress monitoring, or are they not aligned to your district or building goals? These types of misconceptions or patterns can be addressed in the following year in revised guidelines, sample SLOs, and the training that's provided to teachers and principals. In addition to the calibration and audit sessions previously discussed, the SLO closeout process could also be a helpful resource to identify which SLO approvers may need more support or training. I'd like now in the question window again for you guys to take a second to write a response that shares your district's initial ideas for how you might use SLO data to inform decision making. So again, what kinds of decisions would you like to be able to make based on your SLO data? I'll give you just another minute or two to type any responses in, thinking about how do we make SLOs come to life for both your teachers, your parents, your students, and what kinds of decisions you at the district level or building level would like to make based on the data that you're able to collect. See one or two responses that are talking about the idea of using SLO data to help inform stronger grade level and department goals that are aligned with building goals. It's a great way to be able to do that during the approval process, to think about, again, that aligned vision at the start and to say, okay, what is our responsibility at each level of the system to ensure that those goals are met? Last spring, many of you participated in an interactive webinar session offered to our STLE districts with regard to a closeout and reflection on the student learning objective process. The recording of this webinar and the associated tools are posted on Engage now for all to use. I wanted to point out a few of the highlights of this because I think it circles back to this idea of how to make SLOs come to life. Within this webinar, there were tools provided such as the SLO calculator and the Heidi outcomes that can help you analyze your student and teacher performance data and thoughtfully reflect on the SLO results. This can help, again, inform not only future targets for students, but also the instructional support that teachers may need to move forward and enhance those goals for students. Also within this webinar were questions posed for teacher reflection at the end of the SLO process, as well as for administrators. So the questions for teachers and administrators are seen here are just samples of what was posed within the webinar. I encourage you and those responsible for the closeout of SLOs to use this in your own planning. Places like Akron and the Capital Region BOCES have incorporated different ways to document the progression of an individual SLO. We saw within their sample templates places that talked about the first date that an SLO has been submitted. Then there were places to have conversation and feedback provided to the individuals in the development process. There were also places that were indicating that the SLO was revisited during, again, those pre- and post-conference conversations where student progress was noted towards their achievement targets. And then finally, they also had that date in which the SLO received final approval and a specified place for teacher administrator reflection at the end of the SLO evaluation process. So that type of documentation can help inform your future SLO decisions and processes. So today we talked about these 6 steps and how they could be used to increase the quality of your SLOs within your district and the impact that they could have on teaching and learning. Your SLOs should already be established and approved for use in this 14-15 school year. However, you can use the remainder of this year and the tools and resources provided in today's session to start conducting those SLO audits and begin the calibration sessions that you've heard about today. You've got some leverage time now to use these 6 steps for improvements for your SLOs in the 15-16 school year. There was a question posed to us that would we be receiving individual feedback on our SLOs, and that's an absolute yes. Our team will be reaching out to each of you to talk about not only your goals for the STLED program, but also your SLOs that were submitted here. I encourage you, if you have questions about these 6 steps, your own SLO samples or things that you've heard today, you can always reach out to myself, or again, Tasha Anderson has been our program contact thus far, so feel free at any time to just ask a question and we'll get right back to you as soon as possible. So thanks for joining us here today. We're committed to providing districts and BOCES the support you need to engage in this critical work. Please remember that the SLO landing page on Engage provides more detail and resources, including the tips, tools, and examples and webinars that we came across today. We also encourage you to submit any other additional resources you may have found useful for you or your peers in the SLO process. We'd love to be able to submit some additional resources for consideration that could be supplement to this session or perhaps become further resources for other districts across the state. If you've got any questions, you can email again the STLED mailbox. We'd also love to see and share those stories of you engaging in this improvement process. So don't forget to share through Twitter using that STLE hashtag. And then finally, as next step for us, and just a reminder that your action plans based off of your quality framework self-assessment are due to our office this Friday, January 9th. We encourage you to take the remainder of this year to again conduct those SLO audits and plan for improvements starting for the 15-16 school year.